It's 1980. A man is led down a corridor, concrete walls, a single door at the end. He has already confessed. He confessed, years ago, under questioning, to a murder he did not commit. At the trial, he tried to take it back. It didn't matter. The court had its case. The case had its confession. And a confession, once signed, is very hard to unsign. His name was Nikolai Terenya. He was 29 years old. He was executed for a murder that took place in a small town in Soviet Belarus. A murder carried out by a man who, at that exact moment, was still alive, still free, still killing. Somewhere in the Vitebsk region, that man read about the case in the local paper. He may have even attended the trial, sat quietly in the gallery, watched a stranger sentenced to die for something he himself had done. He said nothing. He went home. And 3 weeks later, another woman disappeared. This is the story of the Vitebsk case. 14 years, 36 confirmed murders. 14 innocent people convicted for crimes they never committed. One of them executed. This isn't just the story of a killer. It's the story of a system that discovered, again and again, how easy it was to close a case without ever finding the truth. How many innocent men can a system sacrifice before it finally finds the one who's actually killing?
To understand how this happened, you have to go back to the beginning. Not of the killer's life, but of the mistake that made everything possible. In May 1971, near a village outside Polotsk, a 19-year-old woman named Ludmila Andralova was raped and strangled. The case went unsolved for over a month, and then it simply stopped being investigated. No suspect, no resolution, just a file quietly set aside. At the time, no one connected it to anything. Why would they? Nothing tied it to a pattern. There was no pattern yet. There would be. But it would take investigators 14 years to see it. Over the years that followed, more women began disappearing across the Vitebsk and Polotsk region, along roadsides, near bus stops, on the edges of forests where the fields met the tree line. The method each time was almost identical. A scarf, a strip of cloth, sometimes just a fistful of grass twisted and pulled tight around the throat. To an outside observer looking at all the case files side by side, this would have looked unmistakable. One killer, one pattern, one region. But no one was looking at the files side by side. Because in the Soviet Union of the 1970s and 80s, there was, officially, no such thing as a serial killer. Serial murder was a Western pathology, a symptom of capitalist decay, the kind of crime that happened in a society without socialism to correct it. Soviet criminology had no real framework for a man who killed for its own sake, again and again, with no relationship to his victims at all. So when the bodies kept appearing, investigators didn't look for one man. They looked for closure, case by case, suspect by suspect. This is where the pattern begins, the one that would repeat, with only minor variations, for the next decade. A woman is found dead. Local police face pressure to solve it quickly. A suspect is identified, often someone already on the margins, a drifter, someone with a record for petty crime, someone without a steady job, a stable home, or a convincing alibi. Someone, in other words, it will be easy to convict. Confessions were extracted through psychological pressure, and in several documented cases, through torture. In one instance, officers planted a photograph of a murdered woman inside a suspect's apartment, manufacturing a piece of evidence that didn't exist until they created it. A man named Vladimir Gorely confessed after being beaten in custody. He spent 6 years in prison for a crime he never committed. By the time he was released, he had gone completely blind. 14 times this happened. 14 people convicted, sentenced, imprisoned for murders committed by a single man the system refused to believe existed. Remember that number, 14. because it's going to come up again. By the early 1980s, something had changed in the killer's behavior, though no one investigating any individual case could have known it. He was accelerating. In 1982, he killed 5 women. By 1984, that number had risen to 12 in a single year. The gaps between murders, sometimes a year, once even longer, were collapsing. Whatever restraint had once slowed him down was gone. And the 14 convictions kept happening alongside it, overlapping it, as if the system's failures and the killer's escalation were feeding each other, each wrongful conviction a small, quiet confirmation that he could keep going. He did more than watch from a distance. For years he had been a member of his local Narodnaya Druzhina, the Soviet volunteer citizen patrol, ordinary men who walk the streets at night looking out for crime. The man the entire region was hunting had, for over a decade, worn the uniform of the people hunting him. In October 1985, something happened that would finally begin to unravel it. After one of the murders, a note was discovered tucked into the mouth of the victim. It read, "For treason, death. Death to communists and their lackeys, patriots of Vitebsk." It wasn't the first message like this. Months earlier, a letter signed by the same fictional organization had been mailed to a local newspaper, Vitebsky Rabochi. The KGB had received it and dismissed it as a crank letter, nothing more. Now, with a body attached to the same handwriting, investigators went back and compared the 2 documents. They matched. Written by the same hand. For the first time in 14 years, there was a piece of physical evidence in this case that didn't depend on a confession. Something that could be checked, verified, matched, not manufactured. What followed was one of the largest forensic operations in Soviet criminal history. Under the direction of Regional Police Chief Mieczyslaw Grib, investigators began comparing the handwriting of ordinary citizens across the entire region against that single note. Workplace forms, driving permits, official statements, anything with a signature attached. 556,000 handwriting samples, checked one against another, against a scrawled message written to disguise a murder as a political act. Investigators had also worked out something else about the killer, that he likely traveled by car, and that witnesses had repeatedly placed a small red Zaporozhets hatchback near several of the crime scenes. So police began stopping red Zaporozhets drivers across the region, asking each one politely, routinely, to write out a brief statement. On November 25, 1985, a district inspector named Valery Veretennikov pulled over one such car. The driver cooperated without hesitation, wrote his statement, handed it over. His name went into the pile with all the others. His name was Gennady Mikhasevich. Weeks passed. The samples kept being checked one by one against the note. And then, a match. On December 9, 1985, police arrived at Mikhasevich's home. He was a State Farm mechanic, a Communist Party member, a husband and father. A man whose photograph had hung on his workplace's honor board. He offered no resistance. He had, investigators later learned, already been quietly planning to move his family to Odessa, telling relatives he'd found work there. Whether he sensed the walls closing in or simply wanted a fresh start, no one can say for certain. Either way, the police reached him first. He confessed almost immediately. 36 murders would eventually be confirmed by the court. He himself claimed as many as 43. He spoke about it, investigators said, without much visible emotion. Not the breakdown of a man finally unburdening himself, but the flat procedural tone of someone describing a routine he had simply gotten used to performing. "Women often wronged me," he told them. "I've been storing up resentment against them since childhood." Then he was asked about the trials, about the men convicted in his place. He confirmed what some investigators had already begun to suspect, that he had followed the cases, that he understood what it meant when someone else was punished for what he had done, that it hadn't frightened him. It had told him he was safe. 14. Say it again,
because it deserves to be said more than once. 14 people convicted for Mikhasevich's crimes before his arrest. One of them, Nikolai Terenya, executed. One of them, Vladimir Gorely, blinded in custody, released only after losing his sight. The rest served years each. 6, 10, 12. Time that cannot be returned for crimes that never happened. In the aftermath, around 200 police officers, investigators, and prosecutors came under scrutiny for their roles in those wrongful convictions. Chief among them, a senior prosecutor named Mikhail Zhavnurovich, who had personally overseen many of the cases against innocent men. Several of the wrongly convicted were formally rehabilitated in the years that followed. Compensation, where it came at all, came late. A one-room apartment, a small sum of money, no apology that anyone remembers as adequate. Nikolai Terenya could not be rehabilitated back to life. The trial opened in 1987 before the Criminal Collegium of the Supreme Court of the USSR. Mikhasevich showed no remorse in his final statement. He didn't ask for mercy. He didn't perform regret for the record. He was sentenced to death. He declined to appeal for clemency. A letter from his mother pleading for his life was rejected. He was executed by firing squad in Minsk at the Pishalovsky Castle prison. The exact date still disputed between sources, some placing it in September 1987, others months later, in early 1988. Even the ending of this story, it turns out, the system couldn't record with certainty. The Vitebsk case forced a reckoning that had been avoided for 14 years. Not just that one dangerous man had walked free for over a decade, but that the system built to stop him had again and again chosen the appearance of resolution over the substance of it. A closed file looked identical on paper, whether the right man was inside it or not. For 14 years, that was enough. Every wrongful conviction didn't just destroy one innocent life, it purchased time. Time the real killer used to find his next victim. This has been Red Files. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, because there are more files to open. New case, next week. The Vitebsk case is documented in Soviet and Belarusian court records, contemporary Belarusian press coverage, and later journalistic accounts of the wrongful convictions of Nikolai Terenya, Vladimir Gorely, Oleg Adamov, and the other 11 people convicted for Mikhasevich's crimes. Exact dates for several events, including Mikhasevich's execution, vary between sources. Red Files does not glorify violence. These stories are told to remember the victims and to understand how such crimes were allowed to happen.